He drove up to the airport, parked his car in long-term parking, and called his wife, and was sent to voicemail, as expected. He left a message saying, "I'm at the airport and leaving now. I'll text you while I'm gone." With the background noise from the airport, it would sound like he was flying out soon. He didn't fly anywhere. He went to the airport Marriott to hang out and watch some of the evidence he now had on his wife. Stupid Pete didn't really need nor want to see them having sex. That one time over the back of the couch was enough. Actually, simply seeing her car at Andrew's house overnight was enough. He was curious regarding what they would say, though. It was so crushing, even not watching the video, he had to suffer through the moaning and groaning and slapping and slurping. But eventually, he heard several key pieces of information. First, "Andrew, I know today and tomorrow are because you're pissed, but it's not like you have to try and reclaim me. I know that. Why would I need to reclaim what is already mine? I'm still pissed off about Ricky having to apologize. You need to learn how to better control your little husband. I've been withholding myself from him like you asked me to," she lied. He thundered, "I don't ask you to do anything. You do what I tell you to do if you want all the benefits that come with me." She was getting tired of this overbearing and owning behavior. She was fairly certain that Andrew was close to his expiration date if she wanted to keep her marriage intact, which she did. "I know that I like being with you, but I love Pete. He's a good father and a good husband. I'm not giving him up either. He and I are going to ride off into the sunset together. If you love him so much, why are you screwing me?" She smiled at him. "You know why. You miss being with a big man. I know it's okay, baby. No, it's not your big tool, though I'm not complaining, he's a fine lover. It's just that I don't know. Sometimes I like being with someone who I can still look up to when I'm wearing my heels. I like wearing a man's t-shirt that hangs below my butt. I like putting my hand on your biceps and feeling something large, not just lean. When you and I walk down a street, I never have to worry about someone coming up and picking a fight with you. After working with you all these years, I was reminded that I missed that from time to time. Don't worry, my sweet, you keep taking care of me, and I'll keep taking care of you. Although, if you can't keep him in line, I may have to have a conversation with him. I'm still pissed at him for sucker punching Ricky," she said. "You will not. If you attempt to harm so much as a hair on his head, you'll regret it. You will not hurt my husband, do you hear me?" This surprised Andrew and Pete. Andrew said, "Fine, fine. If he means that much to you, I won't hurt the little man. But don't you forget who you belong to." That statement irritated her because she didn't belong to anyone, but if she did, it was to her husband. Also, get him under control. I don't want him sneaking up on me and hitting me in the back. That wouldn't end well for him, she said. I told you that the girls told me he didn't do that. I don't know how, but he supposedly beat him fair and square, Andrew laughed. I'm sure they just corroborated their stories. No way could that little kitty beat Ricky, no way, Andrew said. He's not a kitty, but if he is, he's my kitty bear. You let me handle him, Andrew laughed. As long as I get to handle you, I'll live with that for now. She wondered what he meant by for now. She didn't have to wait long. The second interesting exchange was after he left the message from the airport. Based on Andrew's attitude, Pete expected what came after. Joan said, "Well, he's gone for a week." Andrew's smile was not pretty when he said, "Outstanding. Now we can take a few more days off and screw some more." Joan replied, "Yes, well, not if you keep screwing me so hard. You're going to bruise me." "How am I going to explain that to him?" "Well, you aren't supposed to be screwing him very often, if at all, so how is he going to see it? He still sees me getting dressed." "You told me you like for me to tease him," Andrew smiled at that thought. "Well, if we get to have sex for the next week, you better keep him away for a few days or he will feel how stretched out you are," she replied. "A cool bath in 24 hours usually is enough for me to tighten back up. Besides, he isn't that much smaller than you." Andrew didn't want to hear that. Taking command, he said, "Here's what we'll do. I'll be gentle like you want me to be, but not here in my house or while we travel. I'll screw you the way I want if we are in your house. I'll be sweet like your cute little husband. You said he wouldn't be back until next Friday night. This worried Joan. She and Andrew had never had sex in her house before. I'm not so sure that's a good idea. Remember what I said yesterday? You do what I say, and everything will work out fine. If it worries you that much, I won't sleep at your home. We'll just have a few long lunches there that will seem perfectly innocent. Joan hesitated a few minutes, but with Pete in Orlando and then Savannah, she should be okay. She would just call him for a few minutes each morning and each night to check up on him. Okay, only long lunches. This just reconfirmed to her that she needed to get away from Andrew and soon. But how? Andrew's evil smile reappeared because he was thinking that once he was inside the house, she would have a hard time getting him out. Andrew wasn't very worried about Pete showing up early. He could handle angry husbands, especially one the size of Pete. Pete made copies of all the videos that were in the cloud folder once they left Andrew's house. He would delete the server files, which meant that unless Ricky was saving them elsewhere, Pete should have the only copies. Pete had several calls he needed to make. Being a Friday afternoon, he hoped people were still working. His first call was to Brian. Hey Brian, it's Pete. Just a sec, sure buddy, I have a few. What's up? Remember the conversation we were having at my house when Ricky showed up to apologize? I do, Pete said. It seems that what Ricky was bragging about is true. Joan has been having an affair. I don't know how long it has been going on, but I know it's been a while. Oh man, I'm so sorry. I take it this isn't a social call? I'm afraid not. I need a favor. I need a very good divorce lawyer, quickly. Don, I know just the woman. She can be mean and vicious or just get it over with, whichever you prefer. Let me give her your info, and she'll make time for you today. That sounds good. Also, please tell Miriam not to mention this to anyone. I know you don't keep secrets from her, so I need this kept quiet until I give Joan the papers, probably next week. Sure, Pete. I'm sorry for both of you. We've always liked you and Joan, Pete said. Thanks, Brian. I'm sorry too. I owe you. No, you don't. We've been friends for a long time, and our daughters have been for even longer. This is just me helping a friend. When this is all said and done, you can buy me a beer or two if you want. I think I might enjoy that. Consider it done. Brian put family lawyer Charla Steele in touch with Pete, and she began to prepare divorce papers. That evening, he could see Joan's car had returned to their home. Just before Pete was planning on going to sleep, his phone rang. It was Joan. Hey Pete, how's Orlando? Hot and humid with a chance of rain, which is pretty normal for late August. How's Memphis? She replied. You mean Nashville? I got back this afternoon. It's lonely without you. I wish we could have another Friday night like last Friday night. Yeah, I'd like that too, Pete said. He would love to go back to a month or so ago when he thought his wife was faithful and have a night like last Friday, but there was no going back. They talked a few more minutes, and she professed her love for him. Love you, Pete. Love you too, Joan. When he disconnected the call, he was terribly sad, but the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. The next day, Saturday, he went back to the airport and rented a car. He needed to get to a dojo and practice some. He couldn't use his car or go to his normal one for fear that someone there might know his wife or daughter and spill the beans on his being in town. He made a few calls and found one near the opera away from their home and her work that would let him come. He spent Saturday and Sunday sparring and working in their gym. They were good workouts, and he felt pretty good about his current level of ability. He would text Joan, and she would text back. He could see her car at their home, and the camera showed that she was there alone on Saturday, but apparently Eva visited her on Sunday. That made him sad. He was about to lose his family. He didn't anticipate losing the kids, but with the upcoming divorce, their family unit would be no more. After a few minutes, his sadness changed to determination. He thought, oh well, I guess you have to deal with what life gives you, which is what he was planning to do. On Monday morning, Pete received an unexpected phone call from Brian. Pete, I needed to give you a quick call. Joan called Miriam last night. She asked her if we would float her resume to our investment advisors because she felt it was time for a change. Miriam said she would look into it. What do you think? I realize this doesn't excuse the affair, but maybe she is trying to get away from the a-hole, Brian said. Pete thought a minute. He thought about his family, what he planned to do, and how his life was likely to play out. While she would never be his wife again, it would probably cause fewer problems with the children if she could get away from Andrew. Yeah, go ahead. The damage has already been done, but I think that might make life easier on everyone, Pete replied. I understand, Brian said. By Monday afternoon, Charla had the divorce papers prepared, and Pete wondered if the liaison at his house would happen soon. Joan called him that night, saying she missed him and loved him. He tried to return the affection. Donnie called him too, and they had a good chat. He suspected that Eva had some idea of what was going on, regardless of his protestations, but Donnie, unless Eva told him, and she probably had, he was going to be blindsided by all of this. Damn you, Joan, he thought. Pete didn't sleep well that night. Pete worked from the hotel on Tuesday morning, and around lunchtime, he was alerted by the GPS on Joan's car leaving her office, heading towards their home. They could ride together, but that might seem risky, so he suspected they would take their respective cars. His home security cameras alerted him to 2 cars pulling into his driveway. He made preparations to drive home. He wasn't in any hurry, expecting them to take several hours. Around 2 p.m., Joan said, "We should be getting back, people will begin to look for us." Andrew replied, "Don't worry about it, I own the company, nobody will question me." True, they won't question you, but they might wonder about me. I don't want anyone telling my husband, she said. Why? You don't think he would divorce you, do you? This was yet another confirmation that Andrew had no real interest in her beyond sex. I don't know. I know he wouldn't want to, he might get by a one-time mistake, but if he knew how long, I don't think he would forgive me, Joan said. You've kept him in the dark for 3 years, I think you can manage. Yes, well, maybe I can if we only see each other once a month or so like we used to. The last few weeks have been dangerous. I'd like to keep it so that nobody but us knows, which is why at least I should get back to the office, she replied. Andrew smiled, thinking about Ricky knowing and maybe participating sometime soon. Joan was a good employee but not irreplaceable. Her future with the firm could be tied to how she behaves going forward. He thought he had her in a good place. She couldn't make waves at the office because it would eventually get back to her husband. The same thing went for her potentially accusing him of sexual harassment. Even if she tried, that accusation would be difficult to prove when the affair had been going on so long. So he felt like he had the power and control over the situation. Pete had parked down the street, out of sight of the house. He had been there for an hour, listening to their conversation from the Wi-Fi cameras that were streaming all movement and noise to the cloud. He heard the comment about 3 years and thought himself a fool. Rather than getting down, he used that to fuel his fire. He checked his home security system on his phone app to make sure no alarms were set and that there would be no chimes when he opened the back door. He snuck in and quietly climbed the stairs. Once at the landing, he heard Joan pleading, "Come on, Andrew, I need to get back to the office." Pete stepped into their bedroom and said, "That means get the hell out." Joan was stunned to see her husband standing there. She pulled the sheet to cover herself and exclaimed, "Pete, I thought you were in Savannah. This isn't what it looks like." Now, Joan, normally you are a fairly intelligent woman, but that has to be the stupidest thing to ever come out of your mouth. Well, except for that, Pete said, gesturing to her lover. He could see his wife's face and neck turn flame red at that comment. "Good," he said. "At least you have some shame." Andrew said, well, the little man decided to come and see how a full-sized man takes care of your wife. Don't worry, she says she only loves you, but we both know that she loves having sex with me. Shut up, Andrew, that's not true, Pete interrupted. Joan sobbed out, I only love you, Pete. Apparently not enough to stay away from this lard bum, Pete said to Andrew. He could see his wife's face and neck flame red at that comment. Good, he said, at least you have some shame. Andrew said, well, the little man decided to come and see how a full-sized man takes care of your wife. Don't worry, she says she only loves you, but we both know that she loves having sex with me. Shut up, Andrew, that's not true, Pete interrupted. Joan sobbed out, I only love you, Pete. Andrew was told by Pete, it would appear that it is not sufficient to keep away from this lard bum. Good God, you can say that you wanted a taller man, but you definitely weren't interested in his being bigger. Actually, Andrew was a little bigger, as Joan described, but no man is ever in a good mood when someone laughs at his tool, and Pete wanted Andrew angry. After leaving the room, Pete did not wait for either of them to return. Joan's tears were becoming even more intense. Despite the fact that she had to put a stop to this, she was able to see Andrew progress after her husband had gotten her moving. She did not want her husband to end up in pain. Despite her best efforts, she was only able to scratch the top of Andrew's shoulders and back with her fingernails by the time she approached him. When Andrew was taken aback by her actions, he instinctively turned around and gave her a hard backhand. This caused her to be knocked back against the headboard of the bed, which caused her to suffer severe pain and shock to the point where she was almost unconscious. The fortunate thing for Andrew was that Pete was already moving down the stairs at a rapid pace, so he did not hear Joan being hit. Pete had no intention of this conflict coming to an end quickly, and he had no intention of leaving his home. As a result, he did not want his house to be destroyed during the upcoming altercation. Pete inserted a mouthpiece just in case, and then he dashed into his backyard as if he were being pursued, all the while being in full view of his brand new security camera that directed its view toward his backyard. Almost immediately behind him was Andrew. Andrew responded by saying, I'm going to enjoy beating on you, Pete. After I'm done, I'm going to bring Joan here and screw her on one of the chairs by the pool so you can watch. Pete was speaking through the mouthpiece and said, I don't care if you screw her or not, she doesn't matter to me anymore. What I'm doing here is teaching you not to screw married women. I expect it to be a painful lesson for you. With a smirk on his face, Andrew made his way to Pete in the backyard, with the intention of grabbing him and beating the living daylights out of him. It was his belief that his superior reach would prove to be a significant advantage in the battle. As was to be expected, Andrew displayed a level of experience that was slightly higher than that of Ricky. He was also wearing his shirt off and had his hands raised in a boxing position that is typical. Pete was able to observe that Andrew possessed enormous arms and shoulders commensurate with his physique. The flab around his midsection suggested that he spent the majority of his time lifting weights and had very little cardio, well, with the exception of screwing Joan. It was obvious that he went to the gym, but the flab around his midsection did not indicate that he did so. In the event that the fight lasted for a longer period of time, Pete would have the upper hand, and it also suggested that his abdominal region might be weak. Therefore, Pete ought to be fine so long as he is able to prevent those large, meaty fists from getting too close to him. For the purpose of the recording made by the security system, Pete appeared to be avoiding a fight by raising his hands upward. The moment he heard Andrew, he made it a point to ensure that it appeared as though he was acting in self-defense. It was only in the event that Andrew attempted to fabricate a story or file charges that he intended to release the video. I really hoped that the video would never be seen by anyone. Andrew charged Pete, attempting to grab him and throwing several jabs at him in the process. Pete was able to easily avoid them by taking a step backward. There was a brief pause from Andrew, and Pete's hands were raised, giving the impression that Andrew was once again the aggressor. Pete was simply waiting for his opportunity to come. Andrew would rush forward and throw punches, and Pete would either move out of the way or use his arms to block the punches that Andrew was throwing. From the perspective of the camera, Pete appeared to be making an effort to avoid being attacked by this significantly larger adversary. Pete could continue doing this for the entire day so long as he was careful. However, he was already able to observe Andrew taking deep breaths. In accordance with what was anticipated, Andrew's large right-hand haymaker arrived after a few minutes of this dance. Despite being from a more formidable adversary, it appeared to be exactly like Ricky. Pete struck Andrew with a powerful blow to the right kidney, just as he had done against Ricky. In spite of the fact that Andrew was in a lot of pain, he did not fall down. Pete did not have any issues with that, considering that Andrew was not making a speedy recovery. Pete jumped up and, as he descended, delivered a vicious elbow down into the kidney area with a loud thunk. Pete's elbow connected with the kidney. After being struck, Pete was hoping that the 12th rib was now completely free of any restrictions. This time, Andrew did put himself on his hands and knees and go down again. He was not making a concerted effort to stand up because he was unable to do so, his side was on fire. Pete waited for Andrew to stand up from his position. As a result of this being recorded, he required Andrew to continue to appear to be the aggressor. However, this was becoming increasingly difficult to accomplish. Andrew eventually stood up and raised his hands, giving the impression that he intended to box once more. Pete was able to observe that he was not moving as well as he had been. Pete was having a good time watching Andrew throw punches despite the fact that his ribs were hurting. The punches weren't particularly powerful, they appeared to be more for show. He was aware that each punch hit must have been excruciating, particularly for someone who was not accustomed to being hit or experiencing pain. Pete was now able to return jabs, but each one was directed purposefully toward the side that had been hit earlier or toward the kidney area on the opposite side. This was because Andrew was moving more slowly for him. In response to each blow, Andrew's expression changed from one of grimace to one of anguish. Andrew came to the realization that he was not going to prevail in this fight. Having come to the realization that he simply did not possess the speed necessary to hit the more nimble individual, he hoped that he would be able to get close enough to the smaller man to rush him, grab him, and bring him down to the ground. Additionally, his side was causing him a great deal of pain, and he was beginning to have difficulty breathing. When Joan was back in the bedroom, she quickly put on a robe and hurried down the stairs after she had regained her composure. As she was leaving the bedroom, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. She informed the operator that her husband and her boss were fighting in her backyard, and she requested that an ambulance be dispatched. When she passed by the home office of her husband, she became completely frozen and hurriedly went inside. The subsequent time that Andrew attempted to rush Pete, it was more of a lumbering, and he was off balance due to the pain that you were experiencing. After Andrew was knocked down by Pete, Pete pretended to be the kicker for the Titans. When Andrew landed on his hands and knees, Pete continued his act. As a result, he was able to get the crushing groin shot that he had been looking for. As a response, Andrew let out a scream and rolled himself into a fetal position, all the while attempting to shield his balls with his hands. As it was already too late, Andrew would not be able to get up without assistance, and it was highly unlikely that he would be able to do so in the near future. "Pity," Pete said to Andrew, who was wailing in pain. In response to Andrew's whimpering and moaning in pain, Pete sat on the ground about 10 feet away and said, "Who's the bear now, a-hole? I'm a screwing Kodiak compared to you. You're lucky I don't drag your bum into the pool and drown you." In a normal situation, he would have been horrified to see anyone in such a state of pain. He had no feelings for this man, other than the possibility that a small amount of justice had just been carried out. He was holding out hope that Joan had alerted the authorities by calling either the police or the ambulance to come to his location. He was taken aback by the fact that he had not seen her. Is she still around? What transpired after that astonished Pete. As she made her way out of the house, Joan was holding the shotgun in her hands, and a black eye was beginning to display itself. Pete had to get up and try to calm the woman who was in a state of distress because she was heading in the direction of Andrew while pointing the gun. She was screaming loudly, "You will not hurt my husband. I'll kill you, do you hear me? You will not hurt my husband." In the process of hugging her to him, Pete said, "There is not much of a chance that that will occur." This caused the gun to point downward toward the ground. With great care, he removed the firearm from her grasp and placed it on the ground, a safe distance away from them. After a few minutes had passed, when the officer arrived and approached them, she continued to repeat, "You will not hurt my husband. You will not hurt my husband." It appeared as though she was beginning to unravel. Following the removal of the shells from the shotgun, the officer evaluated the condition of the injured individual. He overheard the dispatcher saying that the ambulance was only a few minutes away from arriving. At this point, Andrew was coughing up blood, which surprised the officer because the only visible marks on him were on his sides, which were red, and it appeared as though some early bruising was beginning to set in. Additionally, there were some deep scratches on his upper back. As soon as he noticed the dark eye that was developing on Joan, he addressed her first and asked, "Are you okay?" This caused her to stop murmuring. Assured, she responded to him. After that, she shed a few tears and pointed her finger in the direction of Andrew. Pete was perplexed by the response. He assaulted me when my husband showed up. Andrew chased him. Pete was confused by the response. An assault? Simply put, it was a voluntary act. The law enforcement representative inquired, "You need to get to the hospital so the abuse can be documented, okay? Can my husband take me?" "Sure, but you need to go as soon as possible. Right now would be better." "I'll stay here by the attacker until the ambulance arrives," the officer responded. "I appreciate your assistance." In response to Pete's question, he looked him over from head to toe and said, "You appear to be in good shape. May I guess that you are a black belt or something?" Pete shook his head and responded by saying, "Or something. I know how to protect myself and my family, but I can promise you that I'm much more damaged than you can possibly imagine." Joan sobbed on her husband's shoulder as the officer nodded, fully aware that it was not Andrew who had caused her husband harm, rather, it was she who had caused him harm. After bringing Joan inside, Pete helped her get dressed so that she could go to the hospital. He responded with a shake of his head when she asked him if he would accompany her to assist her in making the change. It was because he did not want to see the bedroom where she had been with her lover that he turned down the opportunity to accompany her to the upper floor. Upon descending the stairs, Joan appeared to have aged 10 years more than she actually had. The ambulance had arrived, and as they walked past the officer, Pete asked, "Can we have his car towed away? I don't want it here when we return." Joan doesn't need to see it. It's not that he was overly concerned about Joan, he simply wanted it to be removed from the scene. According to the officer, he would handle the situation. Until they were almost halfway to the hospital, they remained silent while they were in the car. Pete responded by saying, "Speak to me, Joan. Yell at me, scream at me, call me a 304 again, but tell me what you were thinking." The driver, Pete, would not stop. After another minute had passed, he responded by saying, "Assault? How are you going to go for assault? Everyone will know that it was consensual. I won't even lie for you." The expression on Joan's face changed. "I would like to use this as a chance to keep him away from me. He was becoming too controlling, and I had planned to leave him and his firm anyway." "So it seems that I've heard," he stated. It was with astonishment that she looked at her husband. "Just because I'm short in height doesn't mean I'm short in intellect," she whispered to herself. "I am aware," he stated. "I would ask you why you did it, but I already know." It was a hushed "I'm sorry," she said. "The sad thing is, I would do almost anything for you. You know I would. But one of the few things I cannot change is the thing you held against me all these years. You should have never married me. Please don't say that. I made a horrible mistake. We've been so good together. We have a great family, a great house, and good jobs. We have a really good life." He continued by saying, "Well, except for your long-buried addiction for taller, larger men, which was a direct hit. Besides, you should have thought of all of those wonderful things and decided an affair wasn't worth the risk. As a portfolio manager, you should know all about risk." "I know. I was so stupid. Can you please forgive me?" The head of Pete was shaken. "Maybe one day, but not anytime soon. She asked the question, so does that mean there is a chance we will stay together? No, that isn't going to happen. But why? He laughed it off. Why do you think? Because of the affair? We can go to counseling, we can overcome this. Joan, this wasn't just an affair. His little son sent me a link on Friday to a cloud account where the sex fest you and Andrew had Thursday and Friday was recorded. At that realization, she let out a gasp. I don't know if Andrew set it up, or Ricky did. Either way, I heard. You won't have to worry about wearing high heels around me any longer, it never bothered me before. I wish I knew that, it always bothered you. No longer will you have to worry about people thinking your short husband is an easy target to attack. Do you still think Eva made up the story about Paris? Joan was shaking her head almost unbearably loudly, but it was very apparent to everyone. Oh, also, just so you know, when Ricky emailed me the link in his message, he said that Andrew had agreed to find a way to let him screw you too. No wonder he came into our backyard as if he owned it. He had no respect for me, nor for us. Why should he when his father didn't either? And who disrespected our marriage first? That would be you, Joan. After she came to the realization that she had disrespected Pete first, she was utterly devastated. The idea that Ricky could have sexual relations with her was another thing that she found extremely offensive. Ricky was not someone she liked, and she was now aware of the reason he had been hanging around so much. There was no way she could believe that she had fallen so far. Pete, I don't know what to say except to keep saying that I'm sorry. You may be, but sorry isn't enough. You lost faith in me, you lost respect for me, even though I'm a better man than him in every way. That just wasn't enough for you, was it? In the midst of the tears that were streaming down her face, Joan looked out the window. Her question was, what now? I had planned to give you divorce papers today. I'll hold off a little while on those, depending on how the next few days go. We are still getting divorced, but giving you the papers on the day you were supposedly assaulted probably wouldn't look good in family court. He asked the question, so how do you plan to pull off assault? And what was with the shotgun? Do you plan to send an innocent man to jail? I wanted to send him to the morgue, but you were just as guilty as he is, so that comment made her want to leap from the moving car. Joan responded by saying, there is nothing innocent about him. All you have to say to the police is that I was crying when you got to the bedroom, you didn't see anything else. Once Andrew saw you, he came after you. I'll take care of the rest. That way, you don't have to lie. That is a lie, he stated outright. I know, but I was pleading for him to leave, the tears would have been coming soon thereafter. I have this black eye to prove he hit me and skin from his back under my fingernails to show that I tried to fight him off. Pete concluded by saying, and don't forget your inner part full of has come to show that he screwed you. Oops, I mean assaulted you. When Joan heard that comment, she completely lost it and began crying. Pete inquired further, you still haven't told me why you got the shotgun. Pulling herself back together, she responded, crazy things can happen in fights. I wasn't going to let him hurt you. I didn't know how long I had been out of it, so I grabbed it not knowing what the would be like when I came outside. They both knew the answer to the question, well, was it what you expected to see, but neither of them could respond. Pete was appreciative of her desire to shield him from harm, however, she ought to have felt that way 3 years ago and not begun an affair. Pete made a phone call to Brian a few minutes later, while they were still in the car. Brian, it's Pete. Joan and I are on the way to the hospital, we are both okay, but we need a good attorney, and we need him or her fast. I'll give you the details as soon as I can, probably later today. Oh man, sorry to hear that. I'll make a few calls. Are you going to Williamson's Medical Center? We are, Brian informed me. Okay, good. I'm glad you were keeping it in the family. Sorry, that was my poor attempt to lighten the situation. I'll make sure that someone will meet you shortly. Don't talk to anyone until you talk to your attorney. The call was terminated, and Pete looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife before saying, we understand, and thanks, Brian. Pete then disconnected the call. You understood that, right? This is a dangerous game you were playing, and you need to get your story straight before you tie yourself up in lies and end up in jail yourself, on top of the adultery. I'm sure your children and family would love to have to go visit you in jail. Joan groaned to herself internally about her predicament. Perhaps she should jump out of the car rather than continue to play the game. As Brian mentioned, while they were in the emergency room, the administrator of the hospital and the senior legal counsel were there to greet them. They had a personal relationship with Brian, and the attorney was one of their distant relatives. In the first place, they were there to make sure that they were seen right away and that no one attempted to question them until they had met with the attorney that Brian was sending. Upon the arrival of the attorney, she wasted no time in getting to the point that Joan was attempting to make. The events that led up to today were gradually documented by them. These events included the duration of the affair, certain details, Ricky's appearance and involvement, the videos from Andrew's place, and the videos from the Clark security system. As a result of having to explain everything to her husband, Joan felt a great deal of humiliation. Pete was now beyond the point of being angry, he was simply numb. Who was this woman that he had been sharing his home with? The attorney ultimately suggested to Joan that she pursue an out-of-court settlement that would provide her with compensation for a period of time sufficient for her to find employment with another company. She was under the impression that the district attorney's office would not pursue the prosecution of a criminal case due to the length of the affair, which made today appear to be a day of sour grapes. Although it was unfortunate, this was the scenario that was most likely to take place. A further point to consider is that if Andrew were to tell his side of the story, it would be difficult to convince 12 people to convict him. So, why would the district attorney waste the time of the court, which would most likely result in a jury that is deadlocked? Nevertheless, it is highly likely that Andrew would prefer that his name and company remain out of the public eye, particularly in the context of civil litigation. In addition, it is highly likely that he would prefer that the beating he received at the residence of a married woman from her husband not be brought up in conversation. When Pete reached this point, he requested that Joan spend a few minutes with him. He concluded by saying, "I don't care if the settlement is for 10,000 or 10 million. In the divorce papers, I plan to ask for the house, a 50-50 split of all other assets excluding my consulting business, and no alimony. So, you may want to try and get as much as you can. Wait, I want to amend that. You can have the bed, after today, that filthy thing is yours to do with as you wish." Upon hearing that comment, she realized that she would be the only one who would be pursuing the matter. Without a doubt, she was convinced that her husband was going to abandon her. She was aware that it was her fault, but contending with this situation on her own was nearly overwhelming. She responded by saying, "You would be willing to fight me for the house?" He responded by saying, "After everything I've learned over the last few weeks, after what I've seen on video the last few days, after what I saw in our bedroom today, and after what I did to your lover a short while ago, you would ask me what I'm willing to do. You may want to think about what I could do should I be so determined. Imagine what I could do with those videos and who I could send them to. Your laptop backups are on our home server, so I have the contact information for all of your clients and many of the firm's others, and could send them some nice video of their investment advisor not taking vows seriously or showing good judgment. How many of them do you think would want to keep working with you? Go ask your lover how angry I am and what I'm willing to do. Trust me, he got off easy. If the only extra thing I take from the marriage you destroyed is our house, then you will have gotten off easy too." Whenever he used the word lover, it was as if he were pressing a hot poker against her skin as he spoke those words. It caused her pain, but she had no words to express it. Due to the absence of any mitigating circumstances, she was unable to deny the fact. Because she was unwilling to engage in a conflict with Pete over the complete and utter mess that she had created, she agreed with him and made the decision that she would get whatever she could from the jerk who had assisted her in ruining her marriage. At the end of the day, following Andrew's surgeries, Joan was awarded a payout from him. It took a few weeks to negotiate, and it took a couple more weeks to get the check, but it was sufficient that she would be able to survive even if it took her a couple of years to find work and get back to what she was making before. Almost immediately after that, she was successful in securing a new position with the investment advisors that Brian had suggested. Although the pay was not quite as good as her previous position, the fact that it was with a large multinational company meant that she at least had opportunities. She was able to find a condo close to her new job and set up house there. It had 3 bedrooms, which meant that the children could come and stay there. It is my hope that she was able to get rid of the old bedroom set because she did not want it either. She did everything in her power to put her past errors in the past, but the nights were the most difficult. The sensations that she experienced ranged from numbness to a heartbreaking sense of hopelessness. She called Pete on multiple occasions and sobbed before hanging up. However, she did not actually say anything during those calls. She would most likely need to consult with a psychiatrist, and she would be fortunate to receive a great deal of compassion or hugs from the children and a few of her siblings who lived in the neighborhood. One of the things that brought her success with her new business was the fact that she was able to steal some of her previous customers from Andrew. This was a relatively simple process because the customers liked her and were prepared to leave Andrew's company. An individual provided a reporter with information that led them to submit a Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) request in order to investigate a police report that involved Andrew at the residence of a married woman. A rather detailed description of the incident appears to have been written by the officer. This description includes the husband who was attacked but later avenged, the victim of abuse who claimed to have been assaulted, and the officer brandishing a shotgun to ensure that her husband was not injured. It was in the newspapers that the sensational story first appeared, and it eventually made its way onto the evening news in the area. After being discharged from the hospital, Andrew's only response to inquiries was, "It is a private matter, no comment." As for Andrew, he underwent a number of surgical procedures that ultimately resulted in the preservation of the damaged kidney, the stabilization of the rib, and the restoration of partial functionality to a testicle. There was a possibility that he would one day be able to achieve an erection, but it was possible that he would require additional surgery, which would most likely be painful. On Pete's end, the past few weeks had been the most difficult of his entire life. He made every effort to remain on the road for as long as possible. In addition, the subsequent few months and the time leading up to the Thanksgiving holiday were excruciating. It was the day that Joan moved out that he began to experience physical symptoms. The dissolution of their family unit was even more distressing than the passing of his grandparents. Ricky had planted that seed of doubt, which eventually grew into the truth, and Eva was at least partially prepared for what he had to say. She abhorred how her mother behaved, abhorred it. In what way could someone cause such harm to her father? She knew that this was going to hurt her father for a while, despite the fact that he was the innocent party in the situation. She would be fine, her mother. Eva had a feeling that she would find a way to rationalize her actions, or that perhaps this would get her to see things from a different perspective. In addition, she would make an effort to forgive her mother and look after her. She was aware that it would take a considerable amount of time for their relationship to get back on track. Donnie had been prepared by Eva so that he would not be completely taken aback by the situation. His mother was the source of his rage. Due to the fact that he was in his final semester at Georgia Tech, it was much simpler for him to avoid getting involved in the whole mess and to avoid answering his mother's phone calls if he so desired. The entire situation was terrible, and it did not assist the children in their academic pursuits. Pete pondered whether or not he should decide to sell the house, despite the fact that he had been awarded the property as part of the divorce settlement. Subsequently, the 3 sisters reached out to him in an effort to cheer him up. Listeners, I would appreciate it if you could share your thoughts in the comments section below. Additionally, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel.